The air was biting cold as Jake stepped onto the frozen expanse of Blackwater Lake. His breath curled into misty tendrils, vanishing into the twilight. The ice beneath his boots was thick and smooth, reflecting the eerie glow of the fading sun. The surrounding forest stood deathly still, its trees hunched under the weight of fresh snow. Jake shivered, but not from the cold. He had fished here dozens of times, but this was the first time he had come alone. His best friend, Mason, had backed out at the last minute. "Storm's coming, Jake. And you know what happened last year. Blackwater ain't safe." Jake had laughed it off. Superstitions, small-town rumors, the kind of ghost stories kids whispered at sleepovers. But now, standing in the center of the frozen lake, he wasn't so sure. The vanished fisherman. A year ago, a local fisherman, Todd Harris, had disappeared on this very lake. The search team had found his equipment, his auger, his fishing rod, his thermos, even his coat, neatly placed near a hole in the ice. But there was no sign of Todd, no cracks, no footprints leading away. Just nothing. As if the lake had swallowed him whole. Jake tightened his grip on his gear. He refused to believe in the nonsense that spread around town, that something lurked beneath the ice. But as he drilled a hole and cast his line, the uneasy silence pressed against him. No wind, no distant cracking of ice, not even the sound of birds. Something bites minutes passed, then an hour. The sun had fully set now, and darkness stretched across the frozen landscape. Jake adjusted his lantern, the dim light flickering against the ice. Then a tug on the line. His pulse quickened. Jake gripped his rod and began to reel in. The line was heavy, too heavy. His arms strained, his boots scraping against the ice. It wasn't moving like a fish. It was dragging. Then a strange sound, a wet gurgling. Jake froze. It didn't come from the hole. It came from beneath him. Slowly, he looked down. The lantern cast a dull glow onto the ice. He could barely make out the dark water beneath the hole. Then something moved. A shadow. Large. Shifting. Jake's breath hitched. Then a hand broke through the water. The thing beneath the ice. It was pale, bloated, fingers twisted and blackened with frostbite. The fingernails were cracked, hanging loosely from the flesh. Jake staggered back, nearly dropping his rod. But the hand didn't let go. It clutched the line, pulling itself up. More of the arm emerged, the skin gray and waterlogged. The wrist bent at an impossible angle, as if it had been snapped. Jake couldn't move. Then, the face surfaced. The fisherman, or what was left of him. Todd Harris's dead, frozen eyes stared up through the hole. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, lips blackened from the cold. His hair floated eerily in the dark water. Jake wanted to scream. Then, the corpse blinked. A choked gasp escaped Jake's lips. The ice beneath him shuddered. A long, deep crack split through the frozen surface. Jake scrambled back. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He tried to pull his line free. But Todd's head tilted unnaturally to the side. His mouth moved. He was whispering. Jake's breath caught. He leaned in, listening. It was his name. Jack. Then, the ice gave way, dragged into the blackness. Jake barely had time to react before his legs plunged into the freezing abyss. The cold stabbed into his bones. His breath hitched, his body instantly numb. Hands, not just one, but many, grasped his ankles. He kicked frantically, but they tightened. Clawed fingers dug into his flesh, yanking him downward. Too many hands, too many bodies. Beneath the ice, they were waiting. Shapes shifted in the darkness below, their pale faces distorted, their mouths opening in soundless screams. The lost fisherman, trapped beneath the lake, never escaping. Jake thrashed, his nails scraping against the ice. His head slipped beneath the surface, and the last thing he saw was Todd's frozen, grinning face. Then, stillness. By morning, Jake's fishing hole had frozen over. His rod lay abandoned, his footprints ended at the hole, and Blackwater Lake remained silent once more. Winter had always been a quiet season in Hollow Pines. A small, isolated town tucked deep in the forests of Montana, it saw heavy snowfall, bitter winds, and endless nights. But to Henry and Lisa Carter, that isolation was perfect. The couple had been married for 8 years, living a busy city life filled with stress and noise. When Henry inherited his late uncle's remote hunting cabin, they saw it as an opportunity. "A week away from everything," Lisa had said excitedly. "No phone calls, no traffic, just us and the snow." Henry agreed. But as they made the drive deeper into the mountains, a nagging thought crept into his mind. His uncle had died inside that cabin, and no one knew how. By the time they arrived, the sky was a blanket of gray. Snow flurries danced in the air, settling on the tall pines that surrounded the clearing. The cabin was older than Henry remembered. Dark logs, a sagging porch, windows covered in frost. It stood too still, too silent, as if it had been waiting for them. Lisa pushed open the door. The air inside was freezing. Dust coated the wooden floors, and a heavy scent of damp wood and something rotting lingered. "We'll get a fire going," Henry said, trying to shake off his unease. As he stacked logs in the stone fireplace, Lisa walked around, brushing dust from the old furniture. Then she paused. A single wooden chair sat at the far end of the room. It faced the fireplace, perfectly centered, as if someone had been sitting there. Lisa frowned. "Did you put that there?" Henry glanced over. "No, it was already there." Lisa's expression darkened, but she shrugged it off. They spent the evening curled up by the fire, drinking wine and watching the snow pile up outside. But as the flames flickered, the shadows in the cabin shifted, and neither of them noticed. The chair had moved. At around 2 a.m., Lisa woke up shivering. The fire had gone out. The room was freezing, their breaths misting in the air. Henry was still asleep beside her, his back turned. Then she heard it. Creak. Lisa stiffened. The sound came from inside the cabin. Slowly, she turned her head toward the fireplace. The chair was facing them. A cold shudder ran down her spine. It had been across the room before. How had it moved? Then, creak. A slow, deliberate sound. Lisa's breath caught in her throat. The chair tilted forward. Then, a whisper. It came from the empty chair. A low, raspy breath like someone trying to speak through frozen lungs. Lisa's body locked in fear. She reached for Henry's arm, shaking him. "Henry, wake up!" He groaned but didn't move. "Henry." Then she noticed it. His breath wasn't misting anymore. Her stomach twisted. Lisa pressed her fingers to his arm. Ice cold. Then, the bed shifted, as if someone had climbed in beside her. Lisa whipped around. In the darkness, a shape lay next to her. Not Henry. Something else. It exhaled, slow and rasping. Lisa's scream froze in her throat. The weight pressed closer. A hand, ice cold and bony, brushed her cheek, and in the dim glow of the dying embers, Lisa saw its eyes. 2 pits of endless black staring back at her. Then, darkness. The next morning, Lisa woke up alone. The fire had burned down to cold embers. The cabin was silent. "Henry?" she called weakly. No answer. Her heart pounded as she pulled the blankets back. She stepped out of bed and froze. The chair was right next to the bed. Her stomach twisted. Then she noticed something else. Footprints, not Henry's. Bare feet, small, like a child's. But the prints were wrong. They started in the middle of the room. No beginning, no sign of where they came from. Lisa's breath hitched. She followed the prints with her eyes. They led to the bedroom door and out into the snow. Lisa's pulse thundered in her ears. There were no footprints coming in. Whoever had been in their room last night had never entered. But they had left and taken Henry with them. Lisa ran outside, calling his name. "Henry, Henry, where are you?" The snow stretched in every direction. The only set of footprints led into the forest. Lisa's breath came fast and shaky. She ran back inside, grabbing a flashlight and Henry's coat. Then she followed the prints. The woods were silent. No wind, no birds, just the crunch of her boots in the snow. She walked for miles. The prints never stopped, never broke. They moved in a straight line, like someone was leading him somewhere. Then, Lisa saw something ahead. A cabin, but not theirs. An older one, rotting logs, shattered windows, half buried in snow. Lisa's breath came in quick gasps. The footprints led inside. Her body screamed to turn back, but she stepped forward. The door swung open before she touched it. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The walls were covered in scratches. Then, she saw it. The chair, an exact replica of the one in their cabin, and sitting in it. Henry. Lisa's heart shattered. "Oh my God, Henry." She ran toward him, then stopped. Henry sat completely still. His skin was gray, his lips blue, and his eyes wide, unblinking, frozen in horror. Lisa staggered back. Then, a whisper. From the chair, a low, rasping breath. Lisa turned and ran. She never looked back, never stopped. She ran until she reached the road, until someone found her, sobbing and half frozen. She told the police everything, but when they searched the woods, there was no second cabin, no footprints, no sign of Henry. Just the old chair, sitting by the fire, waiting. Vanished without a trace. Lisa never went back. Henry Carter was never found. And on the coldest nights of the year, if you walk through the Hollow Pines woods, you might hear it. The whisper. And if you do, don't sit in the chair. Winters in Fairbanks, Alaska, were brutal, an unrelenting force that swallowed the land whole. The kind of cold that didn't just sting your skin, but seeped into your bones, wrapping around your heart like an icy grip. For Daniel Owens, a seasoned search and rescue officer, the dangers of the Alaskan wilderness were nothing new. Over the years, he had helped stranded hikers, lost skiers, and reckless tourists who underestimated the biting cold. He had seen frostbite claim fingers and toes, had seen people lose their way only yards from safety, and had even witnessed how the unrelenting isolation of winter could make a man lose his mind. But nothing in his experience prepared him for the night of January 12, 2003, the night they found the frozen man. It was close to midnight when Daniel's radio crackled to life. "Dan, we've got a report of a missing person," came the voice of his supervisor, Greg. Daniel groaned, rubbing his eyes. He had just come back from a long shift, his body still aching from wading through waist-high snow to help a stranded camper whose truck had slid off the road. He wasn't in the mood for another mission, but duty called. "In this weather?" he asked, glancing out the window. The snowstorm had picked up, the wind howling like a wounded animal. Visibility was near zero, and the temperatures had dropped well below freezing. Anyone lost out there wouldn't last long. "Older guy," Greg continued. "Around 60. His son reported him missing. Says he went outside to check on something and never came back." Daniel frowned. "How long ago?" "Maybe 2 hours, but with this storm, it might as well be a lifetime." Daniel sighed and ran a hand over his face. "Where's the last known location?" "Out near the old Fairbanks logging road. We've got a team heading there, but they could use backup." Something about the call unsettled Daniel, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was the way Greg's voice sounded strained, as if he knew something wasn't right. Regardless, Daniel grabbed his heavy coat, flashlight, and gear, then headed out into the freezing night. By the time he arrived at the cabin, 3 other officers were already searching the property. The missing man's son, Mark, stood on the porch, arms wrapped around himself, his face pale with worry. His breath came out in harsh white clouds. "I don't understand," Mark said. "He just walked outside. He wasn't gone more than 10 minutes. When I went to check, he was gone." Daniel frowned. "Did he take a flashlight? Any supplies?" Mark shook his head. "Numbered just his coat and boots." That made no sense. No one in their right mind would wander off in this weather unprepared. The cold could kill you in minutes. But what unsettled Daniel even more were the footprints. A single set leading away from the house, perfectly straight, without hesitation, without any sign of struggle. Just walking into the deep, dark woods. A chill crept up Daniel's spine. No turns, no meandering, no sign that the man had realized his mistake and tried to come back. Just a single, deliberate path leading deeper into the blizzard. Daniel clicked on his flashlight and motioned to his team. "Let's move." The snowstorm was relentless, thick flakes swirling around them like a living thing, devouring the light from their flashlights. The footprints led them deeper into the trees, unnervingly straight, as if the man had been following a path unseen to them. The deeper they went, the more the world seemed to change. The sound of the wind, once roaring in Daniel's ears, seemed distant now, muffled as though they had stepped into another world. The air felt heavier. The trees, dark and skeletal, loomed over them like silent sentinels. After nearly a mile, Daniel's flashlight caught something ahead, a shape standing completely still in the darkness. "There!" one of the officers shouted, rushing forward, then stopping abruptly. The missing man was there, standing, motionless. His back was to them, body rigid as if frozen in place. Snow clung to his coat and boots, his arms limp at his sides. "Sir," Daniel called, stepping forward carefully. No response, no movement, just stillness. Something about it made Daniel hesitate. He reached out slowly, about to touch the man's shoulder, when his head suddenly snapped around. The motion was too fast, too unnatural, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The man's face was a nightmare of frostbite, lips cracked and blackened, skin blue with death. Yet his eyes were wide open, staring, but not seeing. "Oh my God," one of the officers whispered. Daniel felt the hair on his arms stand on end. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. "He's still breathing," another officer stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel listened, and heard it too. A slow, shallow rasp of breath. But that didn't make sense. The man had been out here for hours, in temperatures far below freezing. His body should have been stiff, lifeless, yet he was still standing, still breathing. And then, his lips moved. Daniel felt a creeping horror settle over him. The old man's cracked lips barely formed the words, but Daniel heard them. "It's still in the woods." Daniel's body went cold, a different kind of cold than the Alaskan winter. "What is?" he asked, barely able to form the words. The old man trembled violently, his unseeing eyes darting to something behind them. Daniel turned and froze. Beyond the trees, something moved. At first, it was just a shadow, barely distinguishable from the night. But then it shifted. A towering figure, darker than the surrounding forest, standing just beyond the reach of their flashlights. Not a bear, not a moose. Something else. Something that shouldn't be there. Daniel's chest tightened. He could feel it watching them, a presence that seemed to pierce straight through him. Then, just as suddenly as they had found him, the old man collapsed. Daniel lunged forward, catching him just before he hit the snow. "We need to get out of here," he barked at the others. No one argued. They hoisted the old man onto their shoulders and hurried back toward the cabin, moving as fast as they could through the deep snow. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was following them, that the darkness beyond the trees wasn't empty. When they finally reached the cabin, the old man was barely alive. His breathing was weak, his body unmoving, yet somehow his heart still beat. They called for an ambulance, but before it arrived, he managed to gasp out one last sentence. "It let me go, but it won't stop looking." And then, just like that, he was gone. The next morning, Daniel and Greg returned to the site. They expected to see the old footprints, the path where they had found the man. But there was nothing. No tracks. No disturbed snow. As if the man had never been there. As if something had erased all evidence of his journey into the woods. Daniel never spoke of that night again. But sometimes, on the coldest nights, when the snow is thick and the forest is silent, he feels it again. That presence. That unseen watcher in the dark. And he knows without a doubt that whatever was out there that night is still waiting. Winter is cold, dark, and unforgiving, but sometimes the real terror isn't the weather. Have you ever experienced something chilling in the snow? A shadow watching, footsteps that vanish, or something far worse? Share your true horror story in the comments below. Your nightmare could be the next one we tell. Stay warm, and don't look back.